Welcome back to another edition of the Women of Wrestling podcast here on ringbellsonline.com. We're on episode 34 now, which means we must be approaching our midlife crisis on the podcast. But before we get there, let's have a bit of fun. Stu Allen here alongside my colleague Lee Burton.
A very, very different kind of the Women of Wrestling podcast today, in that it's not a wrestler, it's not even a promoter.
It's not even a woman.
It's also, I can't sometimes kind of forget that.
What's going on? Let's do the introductions. Let's have no more about it. So our guest at this time is former WWE creative writer and former head writer of SmackDown for a time as well. It's got all sorts of irons in the fire we'll talk about as we go on. His name is Alex Greenfield, everybody. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on, guys. It's fun to be here. I don't think we were talking about this online. I don't think I get to. Most people aren't interested in the stories of the women's matches. Then that was one of my favorite angles and one of my favorite areas to work when I was at WWE. So this is a pretty cool thing for me.
Cool, and the angle you're talking about, and what it basically started was you made a throwaway comment on a podcast last year. I think it was over on David Lagana's IWantWrestling.com. Formerly creative podcast. You mentioned that you were the guy responsible for the entirety of the Trish Stratus Mickie James feud back in 2005, 2006, and to me that kind of represents the last high watermark of mainstream women's wrestling in WWE. So we thought we'd have you on to talk about the whole thing, really.
It was super fun. I don't want to take that much credit. Obviously, Mickie and Trish were the biggest parts of that angle, and Brangle Works had a great deal of input into it. But yeah, I produced, I'm pretty sure, every one of the backstage segments and in the ring promos, and I was pretty deeply involved in it. But I don't want to be the guy who said I told them every word to say all through it, because they're two really extraordinarily talented women, and a lot of what you guys loved about that program was very much their design.
Okay, well, that's brilliant. We'll get into that as we go on.
Sure.
Just so that people have an idea of who you are, because, you know, it's possible, perish the thought, that someone's not come across the name of Alex Greenfield before. Give the listeners just a quick synopsis of who you are, how you came to be in WWE, and what sort of time frame you were there.
I'm frankly offended that there would be anybody of that nature out in the world. No, I've been a wrestling fan since I was 9 years old. I started watching Mid-South back in the early mid-'80s, and obviously have stayed with it more or less my whole life. I mean, you know, I discovered girls in high school and moved away from it for a while. I actually had gotten sort of out of wrestling for a few years before I got the job at WWE, sort of after the high watermark of the Monday Night Wars, and kind of I dropped out as the McMahon-Helmsley era was sort of fading to an end in the early 2000s, and got back into it when some friends of mine and I went to the show right after WrestleMania 21 at the Staples Center. And I hadn't been to a live event since I was probably, 18, 19 years old, which had been 10 years at that point. And it was such a freaking blast. I had a really good time. And the next day I'd been working as a writer first in advertising, and then I'd had my first couple of features bought at that point. And I went online and I was just poking around, looking at the WWE site the next day, and I saw, their corporate site had an ad for creative writers, and I was like, what the hell, I'll do it. And 4 months later, I started with the company. So it was pretty cool, and, Steph and Vince sort of throw you into the deep water right at the very beginning, and getting to work with, the first program I was working on was the program with Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio, and the paternity storyline of Dominic, and it was a total blast. Like, it was a really well spent year and a half of my career staying at WWE, and I moved up through the ranks to becoming the head writer of a show. And to the point of this show, one of my favorite angles that I was involved in the production with was Mickie and Trish, who just every week they killed it. And what started as they were giving us little 1-minute backstage segments to build the program. We ended up being one of the cornerstones of a whole period there. I mean, that program went on for 6-7 months, from November or so through, well, I guess that's 4 months if you use math. If you want to be technical, but from November through WrestleMania, I was doing that program every week, and it was a blast because we had lots of twists and turns. It's really the sort of serialized storytelling that I enjoy about television, and it was a blast to do.
You're a bit of a curiosity in the fact that, you are one of the, Hollywood writers that a lot of traditional fans go, ooh, when they hear that. But you were, as you say, you were a wrestling fan growing up, and you remain a wrestling fan to this day. You still, on your Twitter, will tweet, you'll live tweet during Raw and things like that, and you're always, pretty damn positive about wrestling for the most part. And when we were setting this interview up, you said to me, it's interesting that we can talk this week because this is the week that Kharma returned at the Royal Rumble. And Lee and I have had some chats about this, and I'm just really interested to know, from your point of view as well, from someone who's been at that creative table, what sort of discussions are they having now? Where do you see Kharma going in the next few months coming up to WrestleMania?
Well, I think there's sort of two answers to that, and there's hope and expectation, and those very often don't meet when it comes to creative at WWE. I mean, we've gone back and forth with this on Twitter and Facebook. I've felt since, August or so, I keep feeling like they're going to pull the trigger on really reinvigorating the women's division with what they're doing with Beth Phoenix and Natalya. And it feels like it starts to get there, and then we get a Barbie doll. Then we get another episode of the Kelly Show, which isn't the brand of women's wrestling that I respond to. Though it's interesting, I was tweeting a sort of positive response to Kharma's return and how excited I was because I think she and Beth are going to tear it up if they can get in the ring together. And I think that program is going to work really spectacularly. And I got a few tweets from fans who were I basically said this is going to be something as good as Trish and Victoria, which happened well before I came to WWE. But I think in terms of physicality is maybe the best women's program ever at WWE. I mean, they just killed it every night. And I got a few responses from guys who were like, yeah, but the difference is I want hot chicks in there. And that's a douchey comment on the one hand, but the flip side of that is you as a fan have the right to want whatever you want, and what I want is women who work at the top level of anyone. Like in terms of working, I don't really see a gender. I want people who can get out there and bust their asses and tell a good story, and that doesn't necessarily seem to be the expectation of a lot of fans. So there's the way that WWE has sort of started down the road of the pin-up strong movement and then pulled back and started and pulled back. I suspect that what's going on around the table is exactly those conversations. Are people going to want to see Kharma and are people going to want to see Awesome Kong and Beth Phoenix beat the crap out of each other? I personally say yes. I think they'll get out there and they'll do matches that are every bit as good and probably a good bit better than a lot of the guys who work on the show. There's a reasonable question to ask as to whether casual fans want that kind of action. And that is absolutely something we dealt with in the Mickie and Trish program years ago when I was working on that. How strong can we have the heat? How much of a match are we giving versus sort of quasi-lesbian tension between them to titillate the audience? And those are entirely reasonable questions, and I think they're probably being asked around the table now. I don't think you would see in a Beth and Karma program it being all about the sexuality of the characters. I think what it would end up being is some bruising, really fucking good matches. Apologies for cussing. I'm not sure your policy on that. Get the beep button.
Cuss all you like.
But I suspect that's going on at the table right now. How much do we want to put into to women beating the crap out of each other? To tell one little WWE aside story, we were talking at one point around the table when we were doing the Mickie Trish program about the great match. I can't remember what the gimmick of the match was, but one of the Trish Victoria matches, there were chair shots. They were talking about gigging, like it was a big thing. And Triple H said, you don't want to do that. Nobody wants to see women hitting each other with chairs and all of that. And I can give you a long treatise on what that's really about, but that is a feeling that does pervade a good portion of the company, especially among the boys, that they don't want to see women get engaged in those kind of physical matches. And with Beth and Karma, I think that's what you would be leaning towards because they're both incredibly talented, very physical athletes. So I bet there's a lot of controversy in-house when they talk about it at all because women's wrestling often gets delegated to the new guy, which is how I ended up doing it. And I think we were successful enough as a team in putting that together. It's one of the things that kind of got me over with the company.
Isn't it something of a self-fulfilling prophecy though, where there's the possibility of having a really rip-roaring kind of set of matches like they could have with Beth and Karma, but there's almost a conditioning of fans now where they kind of expect we just want to see good-looking girls having what's resembling a match, and then you say, okay, well if that's what they want, let's give it to them, even though it's sort of been the case of that's now what they've sort of been conditioned to want. I mean, they could be reconditioned to want something like Beth and Karma, for instance.
I think you're absolutely right, and I mean that was one of the arguments that was going on backstage when I was there, and this is years ago. This was 2005 to 2007. I was there, and I suspect it's one of the arguments that's going on now. And Vince is incredibly capricious about that because he'll literally one day say, that the women's matches that we're putting on are bullshit. We need workers out there, and we'll be absolutely in my camp in terms of what I'm looking for with women's wrestling. And then the next day he'll be like, what the fuck is going on? What are these girls doing out there? We want some TNA, for God's sake. That's T and A, not the other thing.
Indeed.
But you're absolutely right. I think you can condition the audience to absolutely want good, high-quality physical matches from women. Like I said, it sort of felt to me as though WWE has been trying to go that way with Beth and Natalya, and then they keep pulling back from it and giving us cheesecake matches, which I think is, these are both extraordinarily talented women and very, very good workers, and I think you're not utilizing them to the best of their abilities, certainly when you have them doing what amount to cat fights, which don't do a heck of a lot for me, but, I may not be representative of the fan base at large. I think your instinct is right, though, and you can teach the audience at large. It's sort of the way that we've been so conditioned by the lack of blood for so long that when you see blood now, it really, really fucking matters. I think you can train people that what they should expect out of a wrestling match is every bit as good and every bit as physical as a match with the men. Whether WWE believes that or not is a very, very open question.
Yes, and it would take a long time to do as well. The question is whether or not they would have the mind to stick with it when it maybe not necessarily work right from the start.
And that's a very fair question. And look, that's a question that you get to in the sort of A angles too. I mean, look just this year at the way they've started things that are huge movements. I'm thinking here about the CM Punk angle, sort of from the promo moving forward. Started out super hot, and then you get Nash involved and Hunter involved, and they take the heat and they back off, and they move forward and they back off. It's when the guy at the top of the chain is incredibly capricious, you're going to get capricious booking and a lot of false starts. The flip side of that is and somebody else pointed this out to me when I was all pissy moaning fanboy after Punk lost the title and segued off with Nash and Hunter over the summer. Somebody pointed out, look, the Austin 316 speech was a full year and a half before the Austin era began. Sometimes the capriciousness does end up settling and making something great. And frankly, Monday night's Raw was evidence of that. I wasn't a big fan of the Royal Rumble, and I thought Raw was an absolutely spectacular show, almost top to bottom. Even the angles I didn't like didn't make me want to switch the channel. So hope springs eternal, I guess, is the bottom line, if that makes any sense. Like, what are you going to do?
Indeed. Well, we're now on the road to WrestleMania, and if we do just stay on the Kharma Beth thing for one moment, you would think that Kharma versus Beth's got WrestleMania written all over it. But the thing that I was suggesting to Lee a couple of days ago when we were discussing this is that are WWE going to really have a WrestleMania match that doesn't involve Kelly and Eve and all the other girls as well?
That and therein lays exactly the question you're dealing with. Look, I don't think there's any question at all that Beth versus Kharma would absolutely be the best match you could get out of the women on the card. And honestly, I'd throw Natalya in that mix, although I think storyline-wise it would be way harder to get there. It's a real good argument, and I'm almost sure Kevin Dunn would absolutely make the argument that you got to get Kelly and you got to get the hot chicks on that show, and we'll end up with a girls' battle royal to start things off, or for a midpoint segment or something like that. I think your instincts are correct. There's what the match should be, and there's what they'll probably put on. My expectation, as opposed to hope, is you're probably going to see that sort of intense feud after WrestleMania. Where you can support giving the women, I would hope, 15, 20 minutes to go and work a match on the show. Because if you look at some of Kong's tapes from Japan, I mean, she's absolutely capable of getting out there and doing a match that knocks the crowd dead and brings them along and tells a story.
Absolutely.
And I think Beth's absolutely capable of that as well.
So what we're saying is WrestleMania, Lumberjill match, and then Backlash is where we actually get the match we want to see.
That if I had to make a bet on it, that's what I would bet.
Yeah, I'm thinking so as well. Which is a little bit disappointing, but at least hopefully we should get there at the end of the day.
Yeah, or a women's battle royal, and you end up with them doing the face-off, and Natalya. I just have no idea who they're going to couch as baby and who they're going to couch as heel in that sort of program.
Oh, that's also what we're wondering quite loudly over the last few days, because as far as the dynamic is concerned, wouldn't you necessarily want Beth as the babyface and Karma as the heel?
You'd think that, but here's the thing: when Kharma was doing her great introduction and she was just killing people, well, she was being Brock basically, right? She was killing people every week and yelling about Barbies. In a lot of ways, Beth and Natalya have sort of taken on that role. I'm not sure who the heel and who the babyface is. I mean, if Karma's the heel, is her argument, well, you're more Barbie-ish than I am? I mean, it becomes sort of, you start talking about, it's the Mitt Romney argument over here in the States. His argument to become president is, well, the economy's improving, but it's not improving enough. You get sort of lost about what that would be. I think there's an easy way. I would prefer it. I mean, and here we're into fantasy booking land. I would much prefer a Kharma babyface run because I think she could be a monster babyface that people could get behind in a surprising way. It would take a lot of work, but it would be an interesting flip. And I'm a story guy, and I think that's a more interesting story to tell than Interloper comes back and goes after the blondes again, because as blondes go, Beth and Natty are pretty damn awesome at what they do.
Indeed. Let's try and flip things back now to what we were originally assigned to discuss. And that's the Trish and McKee angle from, as you say, late 2005. First question is quite simple. where was the conception of the angle? Who came up with it? Who was responsible for thinking, okay, we need to have a stalker fan angle?
It's a little bit more complicated than that. The stalker fan approach that sort of specific level of detail came a bit later. The guy who originally came up with the angle, I was standing there when he pitched it to Trish, was another new writer who started just before I did in the summer of 2005 named Rudy Fishman. Who's a very talented guy. Has written a lot of shows, and he's now a jiu-jitsu teacher out in Los Angeles. He ended up leaving WWE before Mickie and Trish even got started. But he came to Trish. I can't remember what arena it was, but we were standing outside. Trish had just come back, I think, from a knee injury, but I can't remember for sure. And we were just talking about ideas for her character. And Rudy came up with the idea of hey Trish, have you ever seen Single White Female? And her eyes lit up and she was like, that. That was the story she wanted to tell. And Rudy ended up leaving and, we got through SummerSlam and the idea just sort of went by the wayside a little bit. And we hadn't really thought about it. While this is happening, there's an extraordinarily talented woman down in OVW going by the name of Alexis Lurie at that point, who is Mickie James's working name. And we brought her up. Here is the fun story of how I almost killed both Mickie James and CM Punk's career at the very beginning of my WWE career. They get brought up from OVW, which was, I'm sure you know this, but which was our developmental territory at the time, to do a tryout at a SmackDown taping. And it's literally my third or fourth week in the company, maybe 6 weeks in. And they get assigned to me, and my mandate is here are these kids who I'd never seen at that point. Here are these kids from OVW. Have them do a babyface promo, and we're going to have them do a match. And the girl's the valet, and this guy is a yucky rah-rah babyface. So we go back and we do a promo, and neither of them are comfortable at all because they're both working heel at this point. And here they show up here, and they're like told to both work and cut promos as baby faces. So I do this absolutely freaking horrible backstage segment with them. They end up going out to work. Punk's working the match, and Alexis is basically acting as valet. And the match really doesn't click very well. And certain of the powers that be, I personally, I have no evidence of this. I personally think it was sabotage because obviously people more in the know than me had seen Punk's work and had seen Mickie's work. And for whatever reason, it wasn't very happily looked upon. But they went out, they did a not great promo, and that was on me. They did a match that they weren't really comfortable with, working with someone they'd never worked with before and having to work baby when they'd been working heel, which is, I've never worked a day in my life, but that's awkward and not fun. And they get sent back down to OVW, and it was not a good scene. So I almost destroy both of their careers because I didn't know what I was talking about. And I get back, and Court Bauer, who is another of the writers and who, when he was running MLW, an indie league here in the States, had worked with Punk, just looked at me after that promo, and he was like, oh, God, I wish I'd have known they were getting assigned to you because I would have told you exactly what Punk needs to be. And it was the sort of better than you straight edge society version of Punk was what he had promoted and would have been much better. And he and Mickie in that role would have been great. And oh, well, water under the bridge. A couple months later, Trish is starting to get annoyed because she has no angle. She's basically doing what they're doing with the women's division right now, and that's she goes out, she works a 3-minute match every week, and sometimes she gets a promo and sometimes she doesn't. She's brought up the single white female idea, and we don't have any idea who it is, and we get our weekly tape from OVW. And Alexis Lurie is doing a spot with the Boogeyman, and I can't remember what the OVW story was, but she takes his tree slam, which is the sort of double choke slam into a sit-out powerbomb, sells it perfectly, looks like $1 million. Vince is sitting in the room when we're watching this, and he's like, God damn it, man, why isn't she up here? And we bring her up the next week, and we just sitting down, I wasn't actually privy to this conversation, but I think it was Lagana and Brian just sit and talk to her, trying to figure out who she is and what she's about. I mean, we didn't really know her in a personal way. And we realized right away oh, this is the single white female. And as soon as that clicked, I sort of got called in after Brian had made the decision, okay, we're going to run with this story. And we just started spitballing ideas, and the idea moved forward from there. So that was a really long answer to a really short question.
That's brilliant. That's the best sort of answers to questions on a podcast. I love it. So eventually, Mickie makes her debut then on Raw. It was actually during a Trish versus Victoria match. I believe it was October of 2005. When you were putting this together, and when everyone was putting this together, did you have a comprehension in your head at that point about what the eventual payoff would be?
We had really high expectations from the honest answer is I think it was probably originally expected that this would be a little TV program, probably pay off in a pay-per-view match at either Survivor or what was it, Armageddon? Was that I think that was the December pay-per-view at that point. And that'd be the end of it, you know? Introduce a new hero girl, we'll do the stalker plot, and that'll be the end of it. The chemistry between Mickie and Trish, not that first week when we did the in the ring deal, but that next week when they first meet each other backstage, was so off the charts good. And I don't mean romantic chemistry or anything sort of untoward, just their character chemistry was so off the charts good that we knew we had something right away. It's like sometimes you stumble into angles and realize they're going to be better than one might expect. This one, really from the moment they spoke to each other, you saw this was more than it was meant to be. And that's when, you know, we started expanding we started expanding their part in the shows right there in the second week, right after the second week, right when they talked to each other the first time.
With a situation like that, where you think, this is our plan, this is how we're going to do it, and then somebody says, right, we can really expand with this, and we can really run with it. Did you have this plan and this set out idea of where it would go, and then just maybe sort of pad bits in the middle, or did you maybe come up with more to go on the end of it?
Came up with a ton. When we started the program, there was never the idea of introducing Trish's boyfriend. There was never the idea. The only thing we knew we were going to do at the beginning was the cardboard title belt. Like this, the first image and the first thing that I pitched was Trish wig, cardboard title belt, doing Trish's pose. That was all we knew at the top as in terms of an end game. And I think. And this I can't completely remember. I think the idea was that was going to be the go-home heat, and then we were going to get right into blowing off the angle. Like, again, it was supposed to be a much shorter thing. That was the only bit that the great Temple to Trish thing we had no idea about. That was Mickie and I spitballing ideas, and that just sort of came up. The whole boyfriend and the kidnapping thing and the great chick kick to the head, that all came up over the course of the angle. So I guess from a certain perspective, yeah, we kind of had some idea of an end point and started placing extra things to add it along. But those things I think ended up being completely organic to the story.
The cardboard title belt and all that actually came really, really early in the angle as the feud, because that was the Halloween night Raw.
Yeah.
You guys had the costume contest, everyone was dressed up, and out comes Mickie dressed as Trish with the cardboard belt, as you say. And I was actually watching some of this on YouTube earlier on today, and it was funny because, you know, you had Jerry Lawler in the ring who was, you know, doing his usual, perving over all the girls, and even he was just a little bit put out, or a little bit didn't think it was right that this girl was dressed up as Trish. And
we didn't tell a soul that it was going to happen. Only
really?
Mickie and Trish knew. Yeah. No, we wanted some surprise, and we wanted it to be disturbing. And this, again, this isn't credit to Brian or me or anybody else. This is credit to Mickie. She managed to make that character truly unsettling, and not just in a wrestling way. Like, it felt creepy and weird. And Trish's reaction, because Trish hadn't seen her in full gear, Trish's reaction was priceless when she first saw Mickie as her. It was just brilliant.
That's great. I'm shocked that didn't the commentators even know that this was going to be the angle? No.
Oh, they knew that the centerpiece of the angle. I think people suspect that commentators know more than they do. They get what amounts to a run sheet, a very broad outline of the show, and they knew what the termination of the costume contest was going to be. But they didn't have any idea of what she was going to come out looking like, or how just sort of weirdly dead on she would do all of Trish's act. And it's one of those things I can't be 100% sure, but I know for a fact they hadn't seen her before she came out.
That's brilliant. The day after that then went into Taboo Tuesday, where there was the Fulfill Your Fantasy Battle Royal, where I think they all ended up dressing in some sort of bikini or underwear, I think it was. The story for that one was Mickie sacrificed herself to eliminate Victoria to win the match and defend the belt successfully for Trish.
Yeah.
The question that comes from that, again, having watched that earlier on today, I was just reminding myself of how good Trish's facial expressions were in selling this whole thing. It's very easy, I think, to give a lot of credit to Mickie because she plays the exciting new character, but Trish has to have a huge part to play in selling just how unsettled the whole thing is.
Oh, that's one of people, because, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone. I've always been a heel fan from my earliest memories. I was a Piper guy, not a Hogan guy. I was a Flair guy, not a Dusty guy, because the heel role is a much sexier role, right? Mm-hmm. It's the anarchist, and it's intriguing, and it's out there. The playing what amounts to, if you think of it analogously with comedy, playing the straight man is a really, really hard role, and what Trish managed to accomplish just in terms of sheer acting ability through the course of that angle, leading up to the way she sold the kiss and everything, was just I can't say enough good things about both those women, because again, I was there for a long time, and I took on some top angles, and I ran one of the shows. It really is one of the best stories that I was involved with while I was there, and that's due largely to how just frickin' awesome both of them were at fulfilling their roles, and at both setting up expectations and then just defying them and twisting them at every turn.
The next big beat of the angle, I think, was probably then the kiss under the mistletoe at Raw, and that was the bit where it became, I suppose maybe the undertones were always there, but that was the moment where it became openly a sort of a lesbian angle as well. Was that always part of the plan?
Yes and no. Here I will give you another one of these digressions that I warned you about. Damn it!
Oh, please do.
So the biggest fight I ever got into with Stephanie Levesque was over the approach to this angle, and in fairness, Stephanie ended up being the correct one. But the Big Vis was in the room. You didn't see this; it wasn't on camera. But we were actually using one of the men's locker rooms because it was the best lighting and sound and location for it. And it was Vis and maybe Helms, but there were a couple guys in the room who were sort of watching this. I thought Trish should sell the kiss very differently than she ended up doing it. And Steph went the other way, and I think it ended up being the right thing. Like, I loved my initial reaction is Trish should just shove her away. I didn't want it to go in the psychosexual direction. I wanted it to stay more grounded, I guess. And I think at the end of the day, Steph was absolutely right, and Mickie and Trish were absolutely right. And I think the sensuality of that moment and then the revulsion that sort of came immediately afterwards added so much. And I think it added a month to the program. Like, it really worked. And I think, God, it sounds like I'm kissing my own ass, and I really don't mean to, because this is, again, it's the talent involved that made it work so well. I think it added a month to the program because people just wanted to see where this went and how far we were willing to go with it. And we started moving on from there. We're getting close to the Temple to Trish, which is my favorite of the vignettes of the angle. And it's because Steph backing them up, Mickie and Trish made that moment just sing, and I think it transcended 90% of what you see on the sort of backstage vignettes we do every week, or we did every week when I was there.
I think in a skewed way, pretty much everybody could kind of relate to that situation, because I think everybody knows that feeling of unrequited love. You know, that moment where you lay your heart out to somebody and you don't get the reaction that you want, and the sort of follow-up that comes with it, that sort of pain and anguish and that roller coaster of feelings.
It's one of the things we're really proud of in the angle. You said there was a lesbian tendency, and that's absolutely true. I mean, it's obviously true to the letter of the word. I think one of the things that was really successful and that I'm really proud of about that angle is that wasn't where we were shining the light, and you nailed it. We were shining the light on unrequited love, and the sexuality and the gender roles weren't as much an issue as this woman who's completely invested everything of herself into this other person and just gets it knocked away after what she feels. And I'm talking in character here, not in terms of the actual human being. But Mickie so invested everything in that character, and Trish, it was hard not to feel sympathetic for the villain, and I think the sympathetic, jilted villain is a lot better than some big wrestling, I'm going to beat your ass, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's one of the things that made it so compelling. And just the look on her face after the rejection, it's hard not to invest in that character. I did the same thing you did. I watched a bunch of these on YouTube, sort of prepping for the interview, and I'm still proud of that, and I'm so proud of both of those performers. They did something that I really do feel like transcends the genre we were working in a small way. I mean, we weren't changing the frickin' world or anything, but I'm pretty goddamn proud of what they managed to pull off and the level of performance they were doing that I think is a lot better than what you see in most backstage sketches that we did at WWE, certainly that I was involved in, which may be more of a comment on me than anything else.
You know, you talk about Steph being involved with this. By this point, when the angle's really starting to take shape and really starting to get over, and people are responding to it, what's Vince thinking at this point? Is he digging this?
It's a funny thing. I'm pretty notorious. I got in a lot of fights with Vince McMahon, and I don't think it's just my memory blanking. I don't think he gave much of a reaction to this at all. He clearly liked it enough. It's Vince. He can kill an angle whenever he wants. And bear in mind that I was on Team SmackDown, so I'd send Brian, Mickie, and Trish bunches of ideas. They craft them in the Raw writers meeting. And then my big responsibility was I was actually producing and directing and dealing with them on the day at the arenas. I don't remember Vince ever giving any comment. I remember one of the promo segments, because when you're producing an in-ring promo, obviously when you're producing a backstage vignette, you're there directing camera and dealing with it there. In an in-ring promo segment, like when Mickie kicked the shit out of the boyfriend, which was awesome, you're sitting there beside Vince in what's called gorilla position, which is sort of the last stop before guys walk out into the arena, the control room, for lack of a better perspective, lack of a better description. And Vince looked over, and this is a pretty typical Vince thing, gave me the thumbs up when it was over. And he doesn't always give the thumbs up. It means he enjoyed this. But I don't think I ever had a conversation with Vince about the angle the whole time we were doing it.
Interesting.
Strange as that sounds, I don't know whether Brian had lots of interaction with him about it, but I never heard a bad word from Vince about it, and I heard a lot of fucking bad words from Vince. But I never heard anything overwhelmingly positive. He gave after the WrestleMania match, he gave them both a hug, and obviously, Trish got hurt in the match.
That would be Backlash, I think. We'll come to that eventually.
My apologies. But he didn't respond in any deep way at all. He gave us a lot more time every week, so I think that's a positive, but we never had a conversation with it as long as I was there.
Now, the reason I'm asking is only because, like you say, Vince, if he doesn't like something, can kill something in a moment. And we certainly get the impression from what people say, and with you and your colleagues on the former creative team sort of being more open with people and telling them what it was like, we know that Vince can be very, very fickle. So it seems well, fortuitous, I think, is probably the best word, that he didn't have any strong feelings one way or the other, and he just let you guys get on with it.
Those were often the best things. When Vince leaves you alone as a creative writer, you feel pretty good about your day, generally, because they're the two Vinces that are the most frustrating are the Vince who hates everything that you do. I got that a lot. And I'm not saying whether he was right or wrong. I'm just saying that's the way it was. And then bad creative Vince, and bad creative Vince is the worst of all, because he can take an angle that's kicking like gangbusters and really just annihilate it in 2 seconds by giving you crazy ideas. But he never did that with Mickie and Trish, and he let us kind of do our thing, and to me it worked like gangbusters.
Sure. The kiss then, if that wasn't a part of the angle originally, particularly, who pitched that?
I think it was a combination. I mean, it's not. That's one that sort of arose organically, just given where the story was going. I certainly don't take credit for it. Like, I never pitched it, but as soon as I heard the idea, my guess would be Brian and Trish, because they talked a lot about the angle. But I'm not 100% sure. But once the idea was raised, absolutely everybody was on board with it.
Did either of them ever have any problems with going through with this angle and taking it to that logical conclusion?
No. They were. When I say they were enthusiastic about it, I don't want to give the wrong impression at all. But they were both daring performers. They both really responded when because I got there and I'm telling them about the way we were imagining it playing out. They're both very talented, they're both very creative, and they're both very daring. And one of the things that I like so much about them is that they even said at the time, we love the fact that this isn't just about the titillation, it's about the obsession. And neither of them had even the slightest bit of hesitation.
Well, Mickie had already done a woman-on-woman kiss on the Independence in Ring of Honor with Alice in Danger before that.
Oh, really? I didn't know that, huh?
Yeah. So she had history, I guess. But
apparently, I need to do more YouTube off this call.
We'll link that up to you later on.
Excellent. I like the sound of that.
You were saying though that one of your favorite bits of the entire angle was the shrine. The shrine to Trish. Now, I mean, that was a great little bit of business with all the pictures and the candles, and Mickie was just absolutely batshit crazy by this point.
That was dark.
Yeah, it was so dark. I mean, and frankly, it's one of the reasons they hired me. And look, I killed some angles by going too far with shit like that. Like when I was doing the Taker Randy Orton stuff, right around the same period as I recall, I went so far over the top with the horror movie shit that I hurt the angle, I think. And that's entirely on me. The appearing in the mirror and then disappearing and shit like that. This was one that absolutely worked, that played to my strengths, that played to Mickey's strengths. Huge props to the WWE, what they call the magic department, the special effects department, for really putting together that set in a great way. Our lighting guy, Brian, did a perfect job. I remember when Mickie walked into the room, she just got one of the most beautiful smiles I've ever seen on her face looking at the set, and she was just there on a dime. I think we did 2 takes on the whole thing, and she nailed it. Like, the reason there was a second take was for protection, just in case something was fucked up on the tape,
Sure.
It was really one of the best shoots we did there, as far as I'm concerned, or that I was involved in, I mean. Because everybody just brought their A game. We were given a lot more rope and didn't hang ourselves because there was some concern how darker. Yeah, I was asked at one point, how dark are you going to go with this? And I was like, I want to go really, really dark. And Steph said, go. We can pull it back if it's too dark. And she bought it on looking at it the first time. And that's sort of, just so you understand, in terms of the backstage process, what generally happens is the director producer in charge does the pre-tape and then shows it to either Steph, Vince, or sometimes there's another surrogate, like me when I was running SmackDown, or David or Brian, and they either say yes or no. Steph bought it on the first look, and it was just, I'm incredibly proud of that. Like, I watched that one again today, and I may or may not have illegally downloaded it so that I actually have a copy.
Brilliant. Their first big match, though, was, I think it's kind of like forgotten in the shadow of the WrestleMania match, but their first match was at New Year's Revolution.
Yeah.
And that was one, and again, I was talking to Lee before we started about where this was actually held, and I believe it was in New York area. Is that right? Lee?
There are guys.
Yeah, I think so. I remember it being New York, but don't quote me on that. I'm going to go find out right now.
It was the reason I'm asking was only because it was the first time when looking at some of these angles where there were really serious "Let's go Mickie" chants.
Yeah.
And the people really started to get behind, who, again, by that point was still absolutely the heel, but people were still getting into her big time. And I'm saying New York only because that's one of those sort of more hardcore markets that would maybe have that reaction.
Yeah, it was Albany.
Albany, there you go. What was the reaction then as far as that was concerned? Did you guys sort of think, okay, we've got some magic here, or, what was the thought at that point?
What was the chant? There was a negative chant they yelled. It's like, it wasn't "you are crazy," but there was some.
I think it was "she's a psycho."
She's a psycho. That's right. And we very much noticed when that started to flip around. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you may have the timeline a little better than I do. Was that before or after the obsession, the shrine taping? Because what happened, as I recall, what happened is we did the kiss angle, and that after the kiss, the "she's a psycho" chant started changing into "let's go Mickie" chants. And that shocked us, but we didn't change anything about the angle at that point. And both Mickie and Trish loved that. Like, they both thought that was fantastic, that a turn was happening, to the point that we even talked at one point about doing a double turn and ended up not going that way because it didn't make sense story-wise. But we love, because any reaction, booing, cheering, like, I find the when Cena comes out and talks about how the boos are just as impactful to him as the cheers are, as a heel fan, I find that as tedious and I want to boo Cena as much as anybody else. The reality is he's absolutely right, and that's the reaction you're looking for. And when the audience starts to make a decision like that, you can either fight it, which honestly is one of the things that I have a problem with in Cena, that they've been fighting what the audience is begging for such a long time. Or you can just keep running with it and see what the audience does. And what the audience did was I really feel like they were as invested in a women's angle as they were in any of the men's angles that were running at that point, and more than a lot of them as well. And that's because they started to react in ways that we hadn't anticipated at all. And we certainly didn't anticipate that. But I think it goes to the point Lee was making earlier. I think it was you, Lee. This was getting rejected from Unrequited Love hits you in the guts. And that's hard it's hard to keep somebody who's been just really screwed over. It's hard for you to treat that person like they're just some heel.
I think also this is also a testament to just giving things time to stew. Because you get some things that maybe you get the blow off after. It's like a build up to the pay-per-view at the end of the month, and then that's the end of it. This was left to fester, and it was able to sort of take on a life of its own, essentially, because people had time to think about it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And look, that's when I'm not positive on my Twitter. A lot of what I complain about when I'm being snarky is the undue speed with which angles are brought up and paid off and forgotten about and all of that. And and look, it's one of the things I said in my first interview with Steph, and one of the things that I said throughout, and one of my main causes of tension with Vince after I was promoted at SmackDown to head writer, I like serialized storytelling. I want people to be taken on a long roller coaster ride and not given everything right at the outset. And we were talking about Vince being capricious. A lot of times he doesn't have the patience to tell a long and involving story. And in this instance, whether it was because he didn't give a shit or whether he really dug what we were doing, he let us really take our time with that story. He let us not hotshot anything to just tell one or two story beats every single week. The only thing that we moved through faster of the whole angle, the only thing we moved through faster than we were anticipating, we thought we'd have a month on the boyfriend, and that shit did not work out at all.
Tell us about that, actually. I mean, how all that came about, the boyfriend bit.
We want it again. We're going back to Rudy Fishman's original idea of single white female. We liked the idea that, in sort of a big meta story way, this is sort of the way Mickie, Trish, and I talked about it. We liked the idea that Trish took something from Mickie in terms of Mickie's heart, really, and just stomped on it from Mickie's perspective. And we wanted to create someone that Mickie could take away from Trish and break, because she was at the point of that obsessive, she was the woman scorned at that point. And what the idea originally was that was going to be like a long month. We were going to do a real subtle introduction first and then move on to having the guy just be around. Part of it was casting, and I don't mean to piss on the actor who was hired. I wanted one of the boys. We had a couple of ideas from OVW that I won't share, of guys we could use as Trish's beau, I guess. And we ended up getting this actor who is a friend of someone in the production department, and the people shit on him immediately. And we expected that. Anybody, Trish Stratus is, in addition to being extraordinarily talented, she's a fucking sex symbol. And you say this guy's her boyfriend, all the men in the audience are going to shit on that. It's bound to happen. But we could have gotten somebody in a better... we could have made that work better. So it wasn't originally supposed to be introduce the guy and then kick him in the head a week later. We were going to let that spin out so that you could really get a sense that Trish loved the guy, that this was an important relationship for her, so that when Mickie killed the guy, metaphorically speaking, that it would really matter. And there was no chemistry between Trish and the guy. It didn't work out. That's the only part of creative that we really radically altered because of both audience reaction and the reality on the ground. And we really truncated it because it was plain to see the moment we introduced the guy backstage that this wasn't going to work. And that's not, I don't blame the performers or anybody else on that. That was an idea I'm as responsible for as anyone that just didn't work, and that shit happens sometimes on episodic storytelling.
I'm gonna assume that guy never worked again.
Not at WWE, as far as I know.
Well, the thing I thought about is that you mentioned about having that almost sort of gooseberry as far as Mickey's concerned in her eyes, getting between her and Trish. But it turned out that the gooseberry wasn't Trish's boyfriend, but actually Trish's friend, because actually Mazzara was also part of this feud for a very important couple of segments.
And you actually nailed it on the head. We were desperately trying to find, because it was really important to me and to Trish especially, that story beat, the story beat of taking something away from her in a really violent way, that story beat is really important to get us to the rage that Trish needed to have to get to where we wanted to go with the story. And it didn't work with the boyfriend. It fucking worked with Ashley, though. Ashley, who I continue to think, I think the cord was pulled on her too fast. I think she could still be a big star in WWE today. And I thought she did a fantastic job with this story. But she ended up essentially fulfilling the role that the conception had the boyfriend fulfilling. Because the audience, like, look at the faces in the crowd when it's Ashley being tortured. They cared. And Mickie, nobody was saying, let's go Mickie at that point. She had gone full evil, and it worked. Like, people hated her. We had to walk her to, I mean, not pussy guy like me, but the security guy, had to walk her to her car because people would, like, you very often there will be people like sort of behind a fence or whatever when the talent's going to a parking area. People were like screaming at her. It was fantastic in terms of audience reaction and a little bit freaky in terms of realizing the it sounds dickish, but sort of the power you have over the audience when you're telling a story that's truly clicking. Like they hated her for what she did to Ashley, and they were totally behind Trish. Flip side, people also know that this isn't real, quote unquote, and they had really grown by that point to respect Mickie's talent, and it was superlative, you know.
Just to backtrack a little bit, just to mention a couple of the other major plot points as we go through. It was the Royal Rumble was the bit where Mickie eventually told Trish that she loved her. And it was just before Trish went out to be the referee in the match, which was just fantastic timing because she had no time to give a reaction to it, and then she went out and did the match, and it was actually Mickie versus Ashley in the match, which was kind of not really important in the grand scheme of things, but that was the moment where I think then it became okay. Trish was really freaked out because after that she had suggested that they need to spend some time apart. They need to basically go their separate ways. Yeah. And that leads up to the big moment at Saturday Night's Main Event. Yes. Which was the actual final turn. For those who haven't seen it, it was Mickie and Trish against Candice, Michelle, and Victoria. And it was after the match then where, Mickie tried to kiss Trish again. Trish rebuffed her, and she got kicked in the head. This was brilliant. I mean, there's nothing. This is why I sort of talk about this being a high watermark. There's nothing like this going on in WWE anymore.
I think you're right, and I will tell you something else. We literally all sat and watched the Orndorff turn on Hogan. Like, that's the feel we wanted to give.
Okay.
And like all three of us fucking watched it. I don't think it was the night. I think it was the week before we actually watched it, and I was like, this is what we're going for. They were like, fuck yeah, you know. But yeah, no, all of that, like, again, it sounds like horrible taking credit, and it certainly wasn't just me. It was this whole quartet of people who were working on this really hard. Yeah, no, we always wanted her to be walking out as ref when she hears that, because we did want to plant that seed of doubt. Like, is Mickie trying to throw her off so that she can steal a match, or is this a true expression of love? And Mickie sold it so goddamn well. I don't think there actually ever was any question in terms of the story. Like, I don't think anybody doubted that Mickie meant it. Again, in storyline, obviously. All of that just laid out beautifully. And again, this is a testament to two just wonderful performers who were absolutely game to take things further than, I produce stuff with just about every major talent in the company. And there's very often a point at which, like, somebody can't push their level of performance beyond. And that wasn't true with them. They were willing to take some risks and do some daring stuff, and to really, to go off by herself for half an hour before she says, I'm in love with you. because she had to get there. She had to work to get there. You know, I've done I've done a bunch of movies and TV shows and stuff with professional actors over the years. What they managed to accomplish, that is both Mickie and Trish, to get where they need to go at various points in the whole story. It's every bit as good as any talent I've ever worked with in any media I've been involved in.
That's high praise.
It really is. Like there's a finite number of people from WWE I'd work with again on outside projects. Mark Henry's one, John Layfield. Like I could rattle off a very short list, and Mickie and Trish are absolutely on it.
Yeah, it's from there we go to that angle on Raw. Just the whole Mickey's completely lost it now.
Yeah.
She's got this big gift in the middle of the ring for Trish. It turns out to be the Ashley who she's kidnapped. Trish comes out and she's ready to start beating on this bitch. And it's just the most amazing angle. It's like, if you haven't seen this angle and you haven't seen this segment, damn it, it's on YouTube somewhere. You have to watch it. It's so good. I'm probably understating it as well by saying that it's so good, but it's just I don't. There's not even a question. It's just a statement. Damn it, that was brilliant.
No, it was fantastic, and here's the fun of this. We were sort of spitballing ideas because we knew we wanted to do the present angle. The Ashley in a box idea, all credit due to Trish Stratus and Brian Gewirtz. Like they came up with that idea together. And everybody was on board and we executed the shit out of it. But, no, that was their idea and it just killed. Like there's not much I can say about it. I mean, I was sitting there and it was a case of sometimes with the best stuff that when we were writers at WWE and producers at WWE did is when everything clicked on its own and we didn't have to work very much. That level of performance, I mean, the only work I did is I sort of wrote the outline of the type of things I wanted them to say, and then we just sat in a room and let them improv. And once they had it together, it was a done deal.
Brilliant. And
believe me, I wish that's my Emmy moment. I wish I could take credit for that, but that's, Brian's idea and the execution of two really, really talented performers.
That bit also had an accidental busted nose for Mickie as well, which in retrospect just was a wonderful accident because it just added to the whole psycho atmosphere because when she kissed her whilst bleeding.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And the crowd were buzzing so much about it. And I said to Lee before we started, I watched this earlier on today, and there's nothing around that gets that kind of buzz anymore, and that got a serious amount of buzz, and it was proper heel heat, like you say.
Yeah, well, and think of it this way too. If I'm not mistaken, that was our crossover segment, wasn't it? Well, you guys see it at a different time. One of the most important segments of the show is the crossover from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, or rather from 9 to 10. Yes. Math again. Liberal arts guy. What do you want? You don't see women's angles at that spot of the show anymore. And that's, again, it's a credit to the performers and the way the audience responded to them. But the way she kisses her with the blood, all of that, like, it was an accidental bump that caused the nosebleed. All of that they came up with on the moment. I mean, this is where I get to the best of women workers are every bit as good as the best male workers in the business. There are a lot of top talent who wouldn't have thought to go where they went. And it worked, and that was because Mickie and Trish called it there in the ring. And just the way the blood smears on the lip, it's perfect. It's just perfect.
And then we move into WrestleMania. Big time.
Yep. Oh, God. I love Peter Gabriel. He's one of my favorite musicians. That song comes on when it's like on my iPod on shuffle. I have to skip it.
Oh, it's a shame. I loved that song for that WrestleMania.
Oh, that song killed my soul because I heard it 7,000 times over the course of 6 weeks.
Yeah, that's understandable. I work in radio, so I hear the same songs rotated on a heavy rotation, so I get sick of them before other people do as well.
I'm sure.
There was a line of commentary at WrestleMania, which I just really reacted to earlier on, and if we're talking about what we also do, I also do some commentary, and I wish I could ever come up with a great line like this. Jerry Lawler at the start of the match at WrestleMania, he said, "Look," he goes, "I know it was obviously a more serious situation, but at one time Mark Chapman was a huge John Lennon fan." And
oh my God, I do remember that. It's funny, I didn't actually watch the match prepping for the show, and I remember I was, I'm sitting in the in that catbird seat next to Vince, and we have headphones on, and I heard that line. I wish I could take any credit whatsoever. That came out of nowhere, and it was so fucking brilliant. Like, I wish I could think of something that great.
It was perfect. It was the perfect line for the perfect moment as far as that's concerned.
Well, and it's Jerry's an extraordinarily intelligent man, and we had some problems early on. And look, I wasn't. You're a writer. You're not in the position to tell fucking Jerry Lawler how to do his job, and never mentioned it to anyone. But at the beginning of that angle, if you remember. Jerry was doing his usual puppies, hot chicks bullshit. He got it about halfway through. And if you watch his commentary throughout, he takes it to a place he doesn't very often go because he got the angle and got the importance of the angle. And I remember being taken with the way he ended up calling that match and the Backlash match is not the same as he normally calls women's matches. He called it with a level of gravity. Everybody involved, I feel like, really, really raised their game in this story because we were telling a story. We were telling this very coherent 3-act play, just stretched out over 4.5 months.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. That line is tremendous. I'm glad you reminded me of it because it's so creepy, but it's so appropriate for what that story was.
Well, 4.5 months, like you say, it got to the point where people had got to that level where it's just, I need to see this match. I need to see these two, and it needs to be at WrestleMania. And barring maybe the main event with Triple H and John Cena, I would say that that's the match that most people would have paid to see on that show because you had that want with it, possibly more than a lot of the other matches on the card.
I mean, I hope you're right. There's no way that I can know that. I mean, certainly that was the type of story. I mean, everything about WWE is trying to generate buys for pay-per-views, obviously, and raise ratings, but really ratings are less important than buys for pay-per-views in the overall financial model of the company, I feel like, and again, this sounds like arrogant dick stuff, and I'm certainly not taking credit for it, but one of the things I'm very proud of is I think we created an angle that actually generated pay-per-view buys in significant numbers. WrestleMania being a huge event, it's harder to quantify. I think it's definitely true for the subsequent pay-per-view. And ultimately, I'm really proud of that. And what I hoped is that would be a lesson that women's wrestling can be something that generates real dollar business and isn't just, the cheesecake segment on SmackDown for the Divas Search Challenge or whatever. And we ended up, with the injury and finishing the angle, and I feel like they walked away from that.
Yes, they absolutely did.
Which is sad.
Yeah. WrestleMania was one where, I mean, everyone remembers the cheers from Mickie, but Trish was actually openly booed when she was making her comebacks. The crowd were actually legitimately booing her as well. What was the reaction backstage to that? By this point, did you kind of expect that, or did that still take you a little bit by surprise?
Can I be now a really terrible guest? That's funny because I don't remember that reaction at all. I remember the crowd being very split. part of that is, I've only watched the match on DVD once. My main recollection of the match is sitting there in the arena, backstage, but right there listening to it. And my recollection was that we were proud because it was a pretty evenly split crowd, but that may not have been the case. And I do remember, first, when they came backstage, I can't remember what the next match was, but I remember Trish Stratus getting a big smile on her face and saying, "Follow that." Which
I'll tell you right now, the act,
fucking badass.
I'll tell you the act that followed them, and if that's true, this just blows me away. The next match was Undertaker versus Mark Henry.
Oh, yeah. Well, there you go. And in fairness there, Mark Henry, again, one of my best friends from the business, we sold that angle short. And I could do a whole interview with you about how we rebuilt Mark Henry starting the next week into a killer. Because I am the biggest Mark Henry mark other than Mark himself. But, follow that.
Awesome.
They killed it. But be that as it may, it really did feel like we were at a moment where we could have made the kind of women's wrestling that is what I want out of women's wrestling. What I'm hoping, I just started reading about Pro Wrestling Eve, this European thing. I don't know if you guys are following, and I have high hopes for them because there is a market for it. And it feels to me like the Mickie Trish story and the talent that they displayed should be evidence of that, and we end up walking away from it, and that's at WWE, and that's frustrating.
Well, I mean, there's not only Eve, there's stuff all around the world as far as that's concerned as well. I mean, you've got Shimmer in the States, which would probably be, the top one as far as that's concerned. WSU, Femme Fatale in Canada, PWWA in Australia. They're all over the place. These groups are coming up with women who are, I suppose in many ways too good to be in WWE to a certain extent, because they would never get to wrestle the kind of matches that they wrestle on a regular basis for WWE.
First, you are making news to me. This is a failing of mine. Like it's only in the last 6-8 weeks that I've started discovering some indies that I wasn't aware of here in the States. New group in Chicago called Resistance Pro. Mm-hmm. I've just started getting into Ring of Honor. My friend David Lagana introduced me to it, and I'm really, really loving it. I'm a terrible smart fan because I know a bunch of folks at WWE and I know a bunch of folks at TNA, and I've been very myopic in my watching, and I'm just sort of starting to discover this. So I'm going to have to dig around your site and find links, because I just discovered Eve maybe 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And it's really exciting. I hadn't even heard of the Canadian promotion you mentioned. What were they called?
That's Femme Fatale, based out of Montreal. They've got a big show coming up. Actually, Jazz, who, I don't know if you ever worked with her back in the WWE time, if that works around the same time, she's on that show.
Oh, cool. No, I met her briefly, but I never actually worked with her. But no, cool. No, I'm definitely going to check that out, because I really feel like it's a bummer for me, because I know a lot of these women, and I know they are extraordinarily talented athletes, and by and large, for the last 4 or 5 years, they haven't been given a chance to shine in WWE, which is a total bummer, because they should be, because I think they could draw money, and Vince, ultimately, at the end of the day, is about drawing money.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of Vince, and speaking of just going back to the WrestleMania match, Mickie was talking last year in an interview about that WrestleMania match. And she said that when she got back through the curtain, Vince was quite upset with her because of some editing that the DVD, which I'm referring to the infamous V-lick, which took place during the match, which ended up not being on the DVD. I mean, was that just something that was a Mickie on the fly decision?
I have I'm not even trying to dodge. I have no recollection of that at all, because I remember jumping up out of my seat and giving them hugs and all of that. I don't remember that.
Oh, because Mickie Vince was quite upset. No, absolutely,
Mickey's telling his story at all. That's totally the type of shit that Vince would blow a gasket over for no good reason at all. God, I don't remember that at all. I mean, I remember the lick. I remember popping for it, but which actually, given the context, that's probably not the best choice of words. But I don't remember Vince being pissed about that. That's strange. And again, I'm not at all saying that Mickey's wrong about that. I just don't remember it.
It certainly was edited off future DVD releases.
Wow, that's crazy. Some of the weird PG-13 stuff just drives me up a tree.
Well, so I mean, from there, WrestleMania was the title change to Mickie. They went to Backlash. They did the rematch, and that was the match then where Trish got injured, popped her shoulder, I believe.
Yeah, that was a big fucking ball of suck, is what that was. It Trish was so upset, really with herself. Like, she wasn't upset with Mickie at all, or it's just I get into you have no idea, because I work in entertainment. I get the wrestling's fake line every fucking 15 minutes. It seems like every meeting I get to, isn't that fake? It's fake, isn't it? And it drives me nuts, because they're literally putting their lives on the line every time they go out there. You heard about the kid the other week at Gilbert's school who took a bump wrong and died. Trish came back, not upset about the pain she was in, which was horrific. Not upset about losing business or the angle. Upset because she couldn't give Mickie the match she deserved. How awesome is that? I mean, it's just so. I am a mark for wrestling, and I am a mark for some specific wrestlers, and I'm a mark for Trish and Mickie, and in no small measure because what they were concerned with was telling the best story, and she knew as soon as she got hurt she couldn't tell the story right, and that's ballsy to me. That's good stuff, and very much to her credit. And I mean, from there we went with the turn, and I sort of separated off from the angle. That was shortly before I got promoted. So SmackDown sort of was my world at that point. So I had sort of, honestly, really kind of, I was still involved and still talked to them, but I'd sort of left the angle after WrestleMania. Mm-hmm. I was very excited for that match, because their intention was to go out and do a 5-star match, and Trish was upset that she didn't tell the story she wanted to tell, and that to me speaks really highly of her.
So, if you kind of left, to deal with it on a sort of personal basis after WrestleMania, you may not know the answer to this, but assuming that injury hadn't happened, what would Backlash have? What would the finish what would it have been, and where was the angle going to go after that?
I think what the idea was, because again, we were generating buys and everything. My recollection is that the idea was sort of similar to what had gone on the year before with Dave and Triple H, that we would do the 3-match series, complete the turns, the double turn, and really cement Mickie as champion. Mm-hmm. And sort of three subsequent strong finish defeats of Trish.
Okay, that's strong, yeah.
Yeah, that cements Mickie as a full babyface at that point. And I think ultimately we were going to turn Trish the other way, but again, I really wasn't involved in the day-to-day of the angle at that point. In a lot of ways, once I got promoted to being the head writer of SmackDown, I was just a fan on Raw. Like, when there was time, I would go in and produce one or another thing backstage, but my sort of day-to-day involvement in Raw, there's just not enough hours in the day, It's not a lack of interest. I'd love to have been able to do both shows, but there just weren't enough hours in the day.
Yeah, and you had business to take care of with King Booker on SmackDown.
You goddamn right. and really doing a terrible job with Ray, which is my big. If Mickie Trish is one of, if not the high point, one of the high points of my time at WWE, the way we treated Ray was absolutely the bottom of the barrel. It's my biggest regret. So that's what I traded it for. I went from the greatest angle I worked on to an angle that I'm really not proud of at all. Yay!
Oh man, we can't leave it like that. So, look, Alex, seriously, thanks very much for giving us so much of your time. I've loved this. It's been a departure for us on the podcast just to talk through a feud from start to finish with someone who was one of the main constituent parts of helping it come together. Thanks for giving us so much of your time.
Of course, man.
But I can't let you go without throwing the floor over to you because you are a Hollywood writer, boo hiss, after all. You are still writing things, and I know you've been very active on Twitter and so on, getting out news about your current project, which has just come out, called The Temple. Tell everyone about it, because, again, I'm sure lots of people haven't heard about it yet.
Oh, absolutely, man. Thank you very much for the opportunity to shamelessly plug myself, as though I haven't been doing that for an hour and I've missed the timestamp. I did. I'm a huge fan. As you mentioned earlier, I'm a horror movie guy, and I've been a huge fan of the American horror writer H.P. Lovecraft, who wrote a great many stories in the 20s, in the 1920s, that are in many ways the foundation of modern horror. And my writing partner Michael Eidelman and I wrote a screenplay a couple of years ago called The Temple, which was sort of an attempt to make a contemporary take on H.P. Lovecraft. It's basically the story of a group of U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan who stumble on a haunted house. And what it's haunted by is one of the great old ones, which only a few people will catch the reference, but it's bad. And Amazon Studios, which is Amazon.com's new motion picture division, gave us their Best Script Award and $20,000. And then they gave us a budget. They gave us $50,000 and said, make a version of this movie any way you want. I've been a comic book mark, actually before I was even a wrestling mark. I sort of Mid-South Wrestling, Ted DiBiase and Captain Redneck Dick Murdoch on one hand, and Chris Claremont and the Dark Phoenix saga on the other hand were sort of my creative touchstones as a little kid. And we decided we were going to make a motion comic of this, and Amazon, we turned it in January. Amazon really dug it, to the point that they put it on Amazon Instant Video, on their Instant Video site. So I'd love anybody who has any interest to watch it and, leave us a review, because the idea is they call it a test movie. And a test movie is to see it. And if you think you'd like to see it as a real full-fledged feature film, leave a review, let them know that, because we'd love to make it as, instead of a $50,000 movie, a $5 million movie. And I think, there's action, there's heartbreak, there's an ancient goddess who eats the souls of men of war. How can you go wrong with that? So if anybody's interested, here's the plug. Be ready. If anybody's interested, just go to Amazon.com and enter The Temple Amazon Studios in the search bar. It'll come up, and give it a watch, and you can rag on me on Twitter about it. It'll be fantastic. But we got a great cast. We have Bobby Ray Schaefer from The Office and Darren Cooper from The X-Files. We have a 3-time Eisner Award-winning artist in Rich Kozlowski, whose work I really liked. He did Weapon Omega for Marvel and Beowulf and The King and all this good stuff. So there, plugged away. Otherwise, I'm writing stuff and hoping people buy it.
Excellent. All right, well, we'll give a link on the site as well. And if they want to, rag on you on Twitter, where do they find you?
Oh yeah, just at Alex D. Greenfield. Apparently, Alex Greenfield, a cyclist from Wales who is really, really awesome. But she's not me. So, Alex D. Greenfield at Twitter. Yeah, I'd love to, I love interacting with people. It's really Dave Lagana who started me, doing this with his, hashtag I Want Wrestling. But it's so much fun. It's how I met you, Stuart. And, it's a ton of fun to just sit and, sometimes you bitch about the shows. Last week I just kept saying positive things, which I guess, freaks some people out. But there's a whole little crew of, former WWE writers and superstars on Twitter, who we just, we go back and forth. We interact with fans. It's a super, super fun time. Not that anybody is a fan of me, but I mean wrestling fans in the greater sense, of which I'm just one now, which is kind of fun, actually, just being able to sit and scream Funkasaurus when Brodus comes out. That's kind of where I'm at right now.
Who doesn't love doing that, quite frankly?
That's where everybody's at right now.
I think so.
Well, on that bombshell, we will wrap it up. We've got more podcasts